Woodrow Wilson, our first intellectual president, and the first modern progressive in the White House.
Woodrow Wilson locked up his opposition, opposed free speech, deported people for their political views.
Who keeps saying that? Woodrow Wilson's portrayed as the first modern progressive president because he's the one who brought the academic class in Washington. He's bringing the brains, the intellect, social engineering, but he's also bringing with it oppression and arbitrary control of the economy.
You might think if a college professor took power in the White House, that person would probably be more or less against war. But that's not what happened in the case of Woodrow Wilson, of course. And beyond that, we're given the impression that progressives in general tend to be against war. So if they favor one, well, that's just an exception. But that's really not true. A lot of progressives supported the Spanish-American War, and nearly all of them lined up with Wilson demanding U.S. intervention into World War I. And of course, the U.S. intervention turned out to be a complete fiasco. It helped to encourage the rise of Bolshevism, it helped to encourage the rise of the Nazis, and when you look at the motivation, at the double standard behind Wilson's intervention, it becomes preposterous. Wilson was basically fighting for a principle no country had ever demanded before, which was that during wartime, you ought to be able to book passage aboard an armed, belligerent merchant ship carrying weapons of war through a declared submarine zone and be perfectly safe while doing that. Well, you might as well take the position that people should have been able to walk right through the Western Front and not get shot at. This is not reasonable.
You see other examples of Woodrow Wilson trying to have it both ways with regard to U.S. entry into World War I. In 1916, he was barely reelected to his second term on a promise of he kept us out of war. But once he got us into the war, those who campaigned to say that it was terrible, that the draft is something that shouldn't be happening for sending American troops overseas, those are the people he chose to lock up. He imprisoned the people who called out his BS when it came to his campaign promise of 1916, just a few months prior.
Maybe the best-known case of a poor soul imprisoned under Woodrow Wilson was Eugene Debs, a presidential candidate who in fact ran for president again from prison. He had given a speech saying basically that the war effort was only going to enrich the capitalist class and wasn't going to benefit the average person. Well, whether that's right or wrong, it's not the kind of remark that normally winds somebody up in prison. And in fact, when Wilson was asked for clemency toward Debs, he rejected all such appeal.
He didn't just put his political opponents in jail, he kicked them out of the whole country. Emma Goldman, Alexander Berkman, and dozens of other anarchists and other radicals who had lived in America for decades, Wilson had J. Edgar Hoover round them up, take them to Ellis Island, and quote-unquote send them back to countries they'd never been in since they were kids, specifically for their political views. Tom, you want to make the world safe for democracy, don't you?
I most certainly do not.